Good evening, I'm Reporter's Name, and tonight on Iconic Investigations, we're peeling back the veneer of one of the happiest, most successful people on the planet, sir. The man is a walking, talking musical miracle, yet he remains the central figure in a plot more convoluted than a congressional budget bill. We are, of course, talking about the Is Dead conspiracy, the idea that the actual perished in a tragic car accident way back in 1966, only to be seamlessly replaced by a lookalike named. Now you might scoff, but for decades this bizarre rumor held millions captive, becoming the ultimate game of high-stakes musical Where's Waldo. It's an enduring mystery that serves as the perfect lens through which to view a life shadowed by both the absurdities of fame and the genuine weight of grief. The premise, as dutifully repeated by the most passionate conspiracy theorists, is almost a work of performance art in itself. Allegedly, was driving home late one night after a heated argument with his bandmates. Perhaps they disagreed over the proper use of a mellotron and met his unfortunate demise. Instead of calling a press conference and facing global hysteria, the remaining Beatles, bless their secretive hearts, decided the only logical course of action was to hold a global talent search for the world's most convincing musical. Enter. This isn't just a quirky historical footnote. It became a global obsession driven entirely by clues that frankly required a decoder ring, a telescope, and perhaps an advanced degree in reverse psychology to understand. Take, for instance, the famous Abbey Road album cover. The theory dictates that the four Beatles crossing the street represent a funeral procession. John, dressed entirely in white, is the celestial figure. In black is the Undertaker. Famously barefoot and out of step with the others is the corpse, the man who no longer needs shoes because, well, he's not walking anywhere in the mortal sense. And George in denim is the gravedigger. It's a beautifully elaborate piece of fan fiction, isn't it? Our humorous observation here, folks, is that if this was truly a secret signal designed by the most famous band in the world, they were exceptionally bad at keeping secrets. It's the equivalent of leaving a treasure map drawn in crayon on the back of the refrigerator. They hid their grand secret in plain sight on the cover of albums that sold 100 million copies. We can only imagine the band meeting where they decided, yes, losing a shoe is the most subtle way to tell the world is 6 feet under. The sheer volume of these alleged clues is dizzying. Play a certain song backward and you hear, Is Dead, Miss Him, Miss Him. Look at the drum kit on Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and you'll see the band arranged over what looks eerily like a grave site. The entire thing reads like a psychological thriller, yet the man at the center of this death narrative, the supposed, has spent the last 6 decades touring the world writing hits and generally being annoyingly successful. One must credit his commitment to the role. He's arguably had a better career than the actual would have. But while the world was obsessing over the fictional death in 1966, an insidious pattern of real loss and tragedy was already weaving its way through the life of the real musician. We often mistake the cheerful celebrity for the simple man, but you cannot be the subject of such persistent, bizarre fantasy without having a true capacity for surviving the genuine nightmares. That capacity, as we'll see, began with a loss far greater and more real than any imaginary car wreck. The foundational beat. But before the platinum records and the psychedelic mysteries, there was a simple, shattering silence. For a man whose life became a never-ending symphony, the foundation of his emotional world was laid in profound, unexpected quiet. We often look at the persona, the thumbs up, the effortless melodic genius, and assume an inherent, uncomplicated optimism. Our investigation, however, reveals a trauma at age 14 that ripped out the bedrock of his secure family life, the sudden death of his mother, Mary. It wasn't just a parent lost to time, it was a sudden, violent emotional amputation. Mary died unexpectedly from an embolism following cancer surgery, an event so swift and brutal that it left the teenage and his father, Jim, adrift in a newly quiet house. This wasn't the slow, anticipated fading of illness. It was an abrupt snatching, turning his stable, working-class home into a silent museum of what used to be. The young, a burgeoning creative mind on the cusp of true adolescence lost his emotional anchor without warning. And while his father tried to navigate the grief, the boy was left to process a world that had suddenly proven itself untrustworthy. It is here in the shadows of this fundamental loss that the we know, the one who writes yesterday and let it be, begins to emerge. Think of his creative output. It is characterized by an almost desperate need for comfort, security, and a return to the familiar. He didn't write angry, screaming rock. He wrote deeply melodic, comforting pieces. The loss of his mother is arguably the secret ingredient to the world's most accessible music. It's as if every song he wrote afterward was subconsciously trying to build a safe, emotionally resonant room where the sudden shock of loss couldn't penetrate. This relentless pursuit of warmth became his armor, his primary mechanism for survival. The endless optimism we see isn't just a personality trait. It is a highly evolved defense mechanism against the foundational terror that life can, and will, pull the rug out from under you without notice. He essentially decided, the world is chaotic and unpredictable, so I will be the predictable source of comfort. Now here's where our investigative humor lightens the mood momentarily. We must assume that the cheerful, ever-optimistic we see on stage today is still compensating for that original trauma. Perhaps his famous commitment to vegetarianism is simply a profound subconscious fear of anything else disappearing suddenly from his plate. He's decided, quite rationally, that if he can't control mortality, he can at least control what he had for dinner. All joking aside, this profound early absence defines his approach to partnership in music, planting the first, deepest seed of his empathetic connection to others. It created the specific kind of creative vacuum that only one other person in his immediate orbit could truly understand. That understanding would soon lead to the greatest songwriting partnership in history, a bond forged not over guitars, but over the quiet, shared devastation of having lost the very people who created them. This foundation of shared grief is the key to understanding the next phase of his dramatic life, setting the stage for a musical collaboration that was as explosive as it was emotionally intimate. The secret link to John. The universe, in its sometimes dark and ironic way, often uses tragedy to forge the most enduring bonds. In the case of the quiet devastation following his mother Mary's death was not a solo act. It was a shared script that fate had handed to the one person he was destined to create history with. Our investigation into their early days reveals that the very core of the partnership was a profound, unspoken mutual trauma. When met John, the two found a connection that transcended mere musical compatibility. They had both experienced the most searing, life-altering grief a teenager can face. John, through the tragic death of his mother Julia, who was struck by a car in 1958, and through Mary's unexpected passing just a few years earlier. They were both the boys who had their emotional anchors violently ripped away without warning. This wasn't just a casual shared interest, it was a secret society of sorrow. Think about the psychological impact. Most teenage friendships are based on superficialities, shared tastes in music, clothes, or mischief. Their friendship, however, was based on an understanding of true irreversible loss. They were two creative souls who had learned early on that the world was fundamentally fragile. This understanding infused their work with a necessary depth and melancholy that propelled their initial compositions far beyond simple teenage love songs. The intensity of their later collaborations, the ferocious arguments, and the astonishing vulnerability found in their lyrics all stem from this initial bond of grief. It's the ultimate irony of rock history. The greatest partnership was founded not on shared joy, but on shared emptiness. They were essentially creating the sound of two lonely boys trying to build a warm, loud house out of music so they wouldn't have to sit alone in the quiet. Now for our lighter note on this monumental bond. We must assume their legendary partnership agreement, scribbled on a napkin, probably didn't just cover royalties. It likely had a hidden clause that read, "Must always acknowledge the sheer absurdity of being the two most famous motherless boys in Liverpool. P.S. If one of us ends up selling tea in America, the other gets double royalties." The deep, complex nature of their relationship, the love, the rivalry, the eventual bitterness, was simply the result of two emotionally wounded, brilliant people trying to be everything to each other. They were rivals who were also each other's greatest mirror, reflecting the exact kind of talent, ambition, and deep-seated sadness that defined them. It was a bond that shaped pop culture forever, yet it was destined for a tragically messy and violently abrupt ending that no one, not even the most feverish conspiracy theorist, could have ever predicted. The shared grief that launched the legend would eventually be overshadowed by a loss so profound it would silence the surviving half for years. The fantasy death of his dead was about to be obliterated by the crushing reality of violence. The violent eruption of 1980. After the decade-long absurd drama of the Is Dead conspiracy, where fans obsessed over whether he was buried under the Pepper's Lawn, the real-life violence that shattered his world in 1980 was a cruel, sickening twist of fate. The event, of course, was the assassination of John. This was not the accidental, poetic death of a rock icon in a fictional car crash. This was a targeted, brutal act that ended the life of his creative mirror, his emotional brother, and his greatest rival. Our investigation into his reaction reveals a depth of grief that went beyond mere professional loss. For the violent death of John was the absolute final, devastating cut in a series of lifetime emotional traumas. The silly game of identifying album clues suddenly became macabre, instantly eclipsed by the horrifying truth of a killer's bullet. It was the universe issuing a cruel memo. You may escape the fictional death, but you can never escape the real one. The immediate aftermath was one of stunned, profound silence. The man who could always produce a charming quote or a sing-along melody found himself utterly tongue-tied by the grief. He famously struggled to articulate his feelings publicly, offering only a brief, somewhat awkward comment to the press, which was immediately and unfairly criticized for being too cold. But our analysis suggests the opposite. The loss hit him so deeply that he couldn't form the words. The relationship had ended not in reconciliation, but by a horrific external intervention. Imagine losing the one person who truly understood your earliest, deepest sorrow, and that loss is televised globally. It left an emotional chasm that no money, fame, or musical project could ever fill. The void was total. Now for a moment of investigative levity amid the heavy history. We must note the cosmic irony here. He spent years dealing with people telling him he was already deceased, only for his best friend to be violently taken in the most shocking way possible. You almost have to imagine the surviving thinking, well, that puts a dampener on my day. It's the ultimate darkly humorous contrast between the triviality of fame and the finality of death. He was the subject of the world's most dramatic rumor of death, only to become the prime mourner for the most dramatic reality of death. The assassination effectively ended the potential for the relationship to ever find a complete, satisfying closure. It remains the great, unresolved narrative of his life, a wound that never truly healed. While the music continued, the emotional landscape had fundamentally shifted. But even in the wake of this catastrophic loss had one final, crucial anchor, and fate, ever the cruel playwright, was preparing to take her away, too. The anchor slipped away. Following the decade of Beatles mania, the legal wreckage of their breakup, and the catastrophic unresolved trauma of John's murder, there was only one constant, immovable force in his life. His first wife. Our investigation into the marriage reveals that was not merely a spouse. She was his ultimate emotional anchor, his creative collaborator in wings, and the fierce guardian of his fragile peace. She was the steady, domestic center that allowed the melodic genius to breathe. When the Beatles disintegrated, fell into a profound depression, retreating to a farm where he felt utterly lost. It was who pulled him back, offering the grounding, unconditional love and necessary domesticity he had desperately craved since his mother's death. She provided the stability that his chaotic fame had stripped away, famously enduring relentless criticism from fans and the press just to stay by his side. Her presence was the silent, necessary counterpoint to his global superstardom. For decades, the two were inseparable, a partnership so integrated that they became a single, identifiable unit. It was his refuge, the one safe room where the tragedy of the outside world couldn't reach him. But fate, which had already dealt him such a cruel hand, was not finished. Just as he had seemingly found permanent peace and acceptance, the unthinkable happened again. Lost her brave, private battle with cancer in 1998. For this was a devastating echo of his childhood loss, the sudden, irreversible departure of his greatest source of stability and unconditional love. The decades of comfortable stability vanished overnight. The man who had survived a fake death, a real murder, and the end of the world's biggest band was once again left profoundly alone, wrestling with the kind of crushing loneliness he hadn't felt since he was a teenager in Liverpool. It was the closing of the final, great safe chapter in his life. Here's our lighter take on this otherwise heartbreaking event. We must remember that has always been the ultimate creature of habit and comfort. Losing meant not only losing his, but probably also losing the person who knew exactly where he kept his favorite guitar pick, and the one person who could perfectly decipher his scribbled grocery lists. His return to the public eye, though necessary, must have been utterly disorienting. He had to face the music world, the paparazzi, and worst of all, the difficult task of making his own decisions about which tea to buy. It was an overwhelming return to a world he preferred to keep at bay. The emotional void left by his passing was a massive, palpable space, and in his attempt to fill it and find peace, he made a decision that led him straight into his next great public nightmare, a spectacle that would expose his private life to the world in a humiliating fashion. The tabloid tornado. In his attempt to navigate the crushing solitude left by his death, sought comfort in companionship, which ultimately led him directly into the maw of his most publicly painful and financially disastrous episode, the marriage and separation from Heather Mills. This wasn't merely a celebrity breakup, it was a full-blown tabloid nuclear event, a complete public relations catastrophe that shattered the delicate, carefully maintained image of the eternally happy. Our investigation into this period reveals a star completely vulnerable to manipulation and external judgment, a man whose private attempt to mend his heart resulted in a humiliating global spectacle. The secretive and brutal legal battle that followed their separation was a feast for the world's gossip pages, involving shocking accusations of volatile arguments, emotional turmoil, and complex financial maneuverings. The sheer lack of privacy was unprecedented, turning the usually closed-off star's life into a public spectacle. The financial details alone became the stuff of legend. The final divorce settlement, which saw pay Mills a staggering amount, was meticulously documented by every news outlet on the planet. For a man who had successfully navigated the messy, multi-million-dollar disintegration of the Beatles, this private legal battle proved far more emotionally and publicly damaging. It was the ultimate, very expensive proof that even a global icon and financial titan is utterly vulnerable to personal turmoil and poor decision-making when grief-stricken. The entire affair served as a brutal, final reminder that his personal life, no matter how hard he tried to shield it, would always be subject to intense public scrutiny, and in this case, a profound sense of betrayal. The public watched the spectacle not of a rock star divorcing, but of a man losing a significant portion of his wealth in a highly toxic environment. Our humorous investigative note on this chaotic chapter must focus on the financial element. We must imagine the composer of some of the most profitable music ever written sitting in court thinking, "I wrote hey, and this is what I get." The sheer irony of the situation is staggering. The man who escaped the fictional death of his dead and the actual messy end of his band found himself caught in a legal battle that cost him more money than many small countries generate in a year. The divorce stripped away the last layer of his presumed invincibility, exposing him not just as a grieving widower, but as a man capable of making spectacularly bad choices under emotional duress. While the humiliation eventually faded, the lesson remains. No amount of fame can protect you from personal entanglement. But Being didn't retreat into silence. Instead, he chose to enter the ring for his most contemporary fight yet. The final stand against AI. Even at 83 years old, when most individuals of his colossal wealth and stature are quietly perfecting their golf swings or compiling memoirs, is engaged in his toughest, most contemporary battle yet. He has traded in the bass guitar for a digital shield, entering the modern Colosseum to fight the looming, existential threat of artificial intelligence, AI, in the music industry. Our investigation reveals that this is not a personal financial skirmish. It is a profound ethical crusade, an octogenarian legend using his immense power to safeguard the very essence of human creativity for generations he will never meet. He's leading a forceful public charge against tech companies, warning that unbridled AI could create a musical Wild West that will not only imitate the legends, but financially rip off the next wave of struggling songwriters. Has publicly and fiercely raised alarms that advanced AI tools, which can quickly generate songs in his distinct style, the style of the Beatles or the style of any artist, will soon make it impossible for young, emerging musicians to own, profit from, or even define their own unique work. His concern is that a new artist will create a brilliant melody, only to have an AI generate 10,000 similar ones overnight, flooding the market and devaluing human effort to near zero. He fears a future where creativity is reduced to an algorithm, and where the magical, unique scrawl of human talent is rendered meaningless by infinite machine-made copies. It's the ultimate ethical dilemma. Does the world need perfect imitations, or does it need the messy, singular brilliance of human originality? Having built his life on the latter is championing the cause of the soul. Our humorous take on this final, heroic stand involves imagining the absurdity of the conflict. Here is the man who spent a decade fielding questions about whether a lookalike replaced him in 1966, now fighting to prevent an algorithm from replacing him in 2026. He successfully defeated the fictional, and now he is battling the digital bot and the algorithm 2-0. The image of the legendary songwriter, still touring stadiums, simultaneously fighting Silicon Valley over the integrity of a four-chord structure, is truly magnificent. He's a rock star crusader using his fame as a weapon. His fight underscores the ultimate truth about his life. It is defined by an unbreakable resilience. He's a survivor of foundational trauma, fictional rumors, brutal murder, crushing loss, public humiliation, and now the coming machine age. The question remains, how can one man who has absorbed so much pain and absurdity maintain such an incandescent spirit and fierce desire to keep fighting for the future of music? The unyielding survivor. So what is the final verdict on the mystery of the happy? Our investigation proves that life is not a simple story of luck or effortless success. It is an epic narrative of sheer, unyielding survival. He has endured the unparalleled trauma of losing his mother, the decade-long absurdity of being legally dead to millions, the brutal, unresolved assassination of his creative partner, the death of his lifelong love, and a publicly humiliating financial and emotional betrayal. He is a man who has mastered the art of building beautiful, comforting music in the immediate wake of catastrophic loss, constantly seeking stability in a life defined by instability. The famous smile, the easy charm, and the constant upbeat persona are not signs of a life untouched by sorrow, but the direct, intentional result of a lifetime spent fighting it. He's a brilliant strategist who weaponized joy against the chaos. He's the ultimate survivor of both historical fact and bizarre fiction, having successfully defeated the rumors of his own demise, only to spend his later years ensuring that the soul of music doesn't meet a digital one. He is, quite simply, an emotional titan draped in a beautiful melody. His ongoing fight against AI, far from being a distraction, is the ultimate expression of his survivalist spirit, a commitment to ensuring that the next generation of lonely, brilliant teenagers has the chance to find the same solace and stability through their own original art that he did. It is a commitment to the very human, messy, imperfect process of creation. The real mystery is not whether died in 1966. The real question, the one we leave you with tonight, is this: how much pain and loss does it take to forge such an incandescent spirit? And is that famous eternal smile a product of happiness, or the greatest, most successful act of resilience ever performed on the world stage? We'll leave you to consider that, but we'll see you next week on Iconic Investigations.